The very first returns are now beginning to pour in substantially, and those in just a moment.
From NBC News Election Central, Chet, Huntley, and David Brinkley.
Good evening.
We're all here. The returns are beginning to come rather fast, as we promised. So, first of all, let us go to our summary boards, the ones that give you a quick, clear, easy picture of who is ahead and by how much. They're all here in the middle of the room, and that's the picture at this moment of the total popular vote for president, with almost 500,000 votes.
In another part of the city, the RCA 501 computer is beginning to whir away, digesting these numbers now faster than we can even utter them. So for a report on what the 501 is saying, we go to Richard Harkness.
Well, Chet, I think that tonight I've got perhaps the most exciting assignment of all the NBC News crew, because I'm down in Wall Street in mid-Manhattan with our RCA 501 computer. And very shortly, as soon as about only 1/10 of the total vote is in, we are going to have what we call projections. That is estimates on what the final vote will be in a popular, and then what the final vote will be in the Electoral College. Well, now, here briefly is how that projection it will be made. The RCA 501 computers is connected with NBC's vote-gathering equipment up there with you in mid-Manhattan. Then, here in Wall Street, the computer takes in vote totals, punches them out on tape. That tape is fed electronically into banks of magnetic tape storage reels. Now, the information can be called up with other information from the electronic console. Now, within the computer, tonight's returns are compared to 200,000 factors of past elections. Studies of, the farm vote, of labor, of religious groups, northern and southern Negroes, to name only a few, which we have stored in the computer's memory, and we've been doing it over the last year. And then some 100,000 equations are made in the twinkling of an electronic eye. Well, here then is I think we could call it a wedding of political science and electronic science. It achieves its projections of election results, which I shall be reporting throughout the evening, by doing some computations, the political equations, and the experts tell me to accomplish these equations humanly would take the work of 60,000 clerks. This is Richard Harkness with the RCA 501 computer.
Senator Kennedy cast his vote today in Boston at a branch public library. Somebody was standing outside holding a sign saying, "The landslide begins here." We'll see about the accuracy of that later in the evening. They then left for Hyannisport to wait for the returns, where Mrs. Kennedy said, "These will be the longest hours of my life." Ray Schurer of NBC News is there with them, so let's switch now to NBC News campaign correspondent Ray Schurer with the Kennedy Party in Hyannisport, Massachusetts.
This building is a National Guard armory. It is about 1.25 miles from the big White House on the water where the senator lives. There are signs all over the wall of this armory saying, "Sleep well tonight, your National Guard is awake." But we would suggest no one in this Kennedy Nerve Center, few people in the land will sleep until after a late hour, when the senator will come here, mount the platform behind me, step to the microphone, and make either a concession speech or a victory statement. The senator is alone with his wife tonight, watching the television results. The family is in Ambassador Kennedy's house next door. We have followed the senator all day, and it went like this. After Mrs. Kennedy was driven to Boston from here, they went to the foot of Beacon Hill in Boston and voted in the basement of a defunct library. It did not seem like an historic occasion. The senator whispered a few words of instructions to his wife. She went into one booth, he into another, and it was all over except for the photographers. We drove from there to the Boston airport. The senator said, "Well, this is it," as he got on the plane. This afternoon, there was a picture-taking session on their lawn with the senator, his wife, Jacqueline, the little Caroline, and a Welsh Terrier named Charlie. The senator was on his dignity. He declined any trick poses for the cameraman, and at one point, when a Boston photographer asked him if he planned to use his home as a summer White House, he said, "I don't even want to talk about that." He was plainly preoccupied. He was fidgety. After 11 months on the go, here was finally a day of repose. And so this afternoon, for the first time in weeks, Senator John F. Kennedy took a nap. He has two speeches in mind for tonight, one if it's yes, the other if it's no. At this hour, he, like you, wonders which one he will give. Ray Scherer, NBC News, with the Kennedy Party in Hyannis, Massachusetts.
Thank you, Ray. Vice President Nixon, on the other hand, cast his vote in Whittier, California today in a private home rented from a chip beef salesman. Then they left and set out for Los Angeles, but he deserted the party and drove away for a while by himself. Tonight he is back in town. Herbert Kaplow of NBC News is there with him, so we switch now to Herb Kaplow with the Nixon party in Los Angeles, California.
Well, this ballroom, which will be the center of activities more and more as the evening wears on and as more reports come in, as you see, is not quite ready for this historic moment. That's because just a little while ago, the time expired for a sporting goods exhibit. They were sort of nudged out rather quickly, and in came the people to set up the tote board and all the other accessories for this tote board headquarters. Vice President Nixon himself returned to the hotel. He's up in his 5th floor suite. He returned here about 3/4 of an hour ago. He had gone for lunch to Tijuana. Quite a bit of a surprise to us. We had left him right after he had voted in Whittier this morning. He had then switched cars and indicated he was taking a ride just sort of to clear his head. Decided to go all the way 140 miles to Tijuana. As we say, he is now back. Presumably, he is upstairs looking at the first fragmentary returns in so far. The Vice President did so this morning and the last few days to be an appreciably more, noticeably more relaxed, self-assured, and perhaps a more confident man these last few days and today than he did, say, a week or a week and a half ago. He's not going to predict that he's going to win this, but he does feel, obviously, from the last week especially, and this conforms with his political philosophy of campaigning, the last week and 2 weeks are decisive. He feels that this last week has been profitable, has been productive. And he has said this morning that he would not concede any state, even Alaska, which is generally put in the Kennedy column, nor would he claim such a state as Maine or Vermont, which is generally given to the Republicans. Herb Kaplow, NBC News at the Nixon headquarters at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles.
The Connecticut polls are closed at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. That's 45 minutes ago, and the returns are beginning to come in now so rapidly that our victory desk, we'll go into that in some further detail later. Well, it's a desk that decides when there are enough returns in and the figures are one-sided enough to make a judgment that one candidate is won. In Connecticut, it has made the judgment, and Kennedy has been declared the winner.
At the United Nations, the Security Council debate on Soviet charges of American aggression ends with a sharp final clash between Gromyko and Lodge. Ambassador Lodge counters repeated denials of Soviet spy activities with a concrete and dramatic example. He tells how the Soviet planted a listening device in America's Moscow embassy, concealed inside a wooden carving of the Great Seal, presented as a gift by the Russians.
Go ahead, open it up. And here is the clandestine listening device. You can see the antenna in the aerial, and it was right under the beak of the eagle. I might add that it's really quite an interesting device.
The actual vote on Russia's move to censor the United States for the U-2 incident follows, with a 7-2 vote in favor of America. Only Poland sides with the Soviet. Russia now threatens to take its charges to the General Assembly, thus getting the maximum propaganda mileage from the incident of the shot-down reconnaissance plane. Meanwhile, the Council moves on to consider a resolution calling for the Big Four to resume their top-level conference.
This East Berlin apartment house, a stone's throw from the Wall of Hate, was one station on an underground railway that led from communist slavery to freedom in West Berlin. Now, this story of heroism is revealed, only with the death of the man who succeeded in leading 40 refugees to freedom. A West Berliner, Heinz Herka, constructed this tunnel from the east to the west, an escape way that led under the wall to another house in the free Berlin. One night, East Berlin police spotted this hero, and he was shot to death. His memory will live with those whose freedom he bought with his life.
I was a pilot in the Air Force, and naturally when Sputnik went up, I covered that for Channel 10 in Albany, Georgia. And that's one of the reasons why I chose to come to Cape Canaveral. And now 165 space flights later, 134 of them space shuttles. We're here for the 135th space shuttle. Now this will indeed end an era. I've never been sick and had the privilege of covering every mission flown by American astronauts. I was working for our affiliate Channel 10 in Albany, Georgia, and had had a run-in with the Ku Klux Klan there. My crew and I had been out, and we were filming a meeting they had in a pasture, and they found us in the woods doing this film and, roughed us up in our equipment and all. And it was suggested to me by the police in Albany that it would be wise if I would relocate, that these guys were really after me. And so anyway, I relocated at Cape Canaveral, Florida, came down here. I was very interested in the space program. After working for a local radio station for a couple of months, I wrote a letter to William R. McAndrew, the executive vice president of NBC News, asking him why he didn't have a reporter here at this internationally hot dateline when the other networks did. So they called me on July the 21st and asked me if I would cover a satellite launch. It was scheduled the next week. And I said to the desk at the time, Jerry Jacobs was the editor that had called me. I said, what about tonight? And he says, what do you mean tonight? I said, we have a Thor Able launching tonight, and we have a mouse called Wiki Mouse in the nose cone. Well, that was big news in those days. So anyway, they wanted me to cover that right away. So I did 3 radio spots and a TV spot the next morning for the Today Show on the launch of Wiki Mouse, and that started the whole thing here. I started as a stringer, and stayed on duty here as a stringer for NBC for a couple of years and then made staff. And, of course, the first manned launch, I covered the launch of Alan Shepard on May 5th, 1961. I not only covered space, I covered Dr. Martin Luther King's campaign for NBC. I got to know Dr. King, who was a wonderful person, a wonderful man, and did so much good for our culture in the past century.
The city is for some glamorous, stimulating, prosperous. Only recently has it become dangerous. 5 young girls have been strangled in the Boston area in little over a year. The stranglings have become the chief topic of conversation between housewives on the telephone, co-eds between classes, and secretaries during coffee breaks. Some carry heavy ashtrays and other artifacts suitable for throwing, and karate and jiu-jitsu courses are becoming very popular. One karate course is advertised as a must for city living.
It would have made a frightening Hitchcock thriller if the crimes hadn't been real. A killer was stalking Boston women, raping and strangling them. In the most grotesque manner, he would display his work, and he always left a bizarre calling card, a nylon tied in a granny knot around the neck of each victim. The strangler's first victim was Anna Slessers, a 55-year-old divorcee, brutally beaten and strangled while a parade passed down her Back Bay street. From June 1962 until January 1964, 10 more women would die the same way. They were young and old, black and white. As the number of victims grew, police became more and more frustrated. No woman felt safe. An intense investigation ensued. Police even brought in a psychic, but their efforts brought no hard leads. It wasn't until 11 months after the last strangling, purely by chance, Cambridge police arrested a conman and rapist named Albert DeSalvo on unrelated charges. DeSalvo confessed to be the strangler. Attorney F. Lee Bailey came in to defend him. DeSalvo related details of the crime no one but the killer could have known. Even though DeSalvo had confessed, police had no hard evidence tying him to the stranglings.
Havana, early 1962. Castro's government has invasion jitters. It is whispered Kennedy has asked the Soviets to keep hands off should the United States invade Cuba. That Kennedy has promised anti-Castro Cubans the support of 6 United States divisions. Castro pleads with Khrushchev. He says an invasion is coming. Up to now, the Kremlin has turned a deaf ear. Now, Castro's needs coincide with Khrushchev's. On Cuban TV, Castro denounces the blockade.
Everything has been a total fiasco for the Americans. Now they attempt to prevent us from defending ourselves. They expect us not to look for help from the socialist camp. That is imperialism.
Now the showdown has begun. For the first time, the cities of the United States and the people who live in them are vulnerable if war comes.
Do you, Ambassador Zorin, deny that the USSR has placed and is placing medium and intermediate range missiles and sights in Cuba? Yes or no? Don't wait for the translation, yes or no. World opinion right now, and you can answer yes or no. You have denied that they exist. I want to know if I've understood you correctly.
I should like to say...
Sir, would you please continue your statement? You will have your answer in due course.
Continue your statement, please. You will receive the answer in the due course. Do not worry.
I'm prepared to wait for my answer until hell freezes over, if that's your decision. And I'm also prepared to present the evidence in this room.
The President signed it at 7:06 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time tonight. The usually illegible Kennedy scrawl was firm and plain this time, as if the President wanted to be sure that even Nikita Khrushchev could recognize his signature. Mr. Kennedy was solemn and unsmiling as he wrote John Fitzgerald Kennedy to this document, which is intended to move Soviet missiles out of this hemisphere. Within minutes after he signed, the proclamation was going forth to all world capitals, to all foreign ministries. And the task man who covers the White House was dictating the contents to Moscow.
And by all NBC stations, a hotline bulletin in 10 seconds.
Several shots were fired as President Kennedy's motorcade passed through downtown Dallas. The crowd screamed and lay down on the grass as the motorcade went by. It was not known if the shots were aimed at the president. Repeat, it is not known if the shots were aimed at the president.
Here is a flash from the Associated Press, Dateline Dallas. 2 priests who were with President Kennedy say he is dead of bullet wounds.
White House Press Secretary Malcolm Kilduff has just announced that President Kennedy died at approximately 1 o'clock Central Standard Time.
He died of a gunshot wound in the brain.
After being shot at
After being shot
by an unknown assailant
during
a motorcade drive through downtown Dallas.
We have suffered a loss that cannot be waived. I know that the world shares the sorrow that Mrs. Kennedy and her family bear.
The FBI today arrested 21 white men in connection with last summer's murder of 3 civil rights workers in Mississippi. That is the latest development in the drama that began to unfold months ago with the Mississippi Summer Project. Hundreds of young people were trained and sent to Mississippi, there to instruct Negroes in a variety of subjects, including the exercise of constitutional rights. The project was bitterly resented by many white Mississippians, and it was no surprise when last June 3 of the civil rights workers disappeared. 2 were white New Yorkers, Michael Schwerner, 24, whose wife was also in Mississippi, Andrew Goodman, a student at Queens College in New York. Goodman was 21. And the third was James Cheney, a Negro from Meridian. Cheney also was 21. The 3 had gone from Meridian to Philadelphia, Mississippi, to look at a burned-out Negro church. The deputy sheriff in Philadelphia, Cecil Price, said later that he had arrested them for speeding and released them after 6 hours.
They got in the car and said they were going to Meridian, Mississippi. Got in the police car with the city policemen. We followed them several blocks to be sure that they did go that way. And last we saw them, they were going down 19 south towards Meridian. We turned around and come back up in the business part of the town.
The last man to admit seeing them alive, and he was among those arrested today. When the FBI entered the case, it found the station wagon that Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman had used. It had been burned. Then in August, the FBI found the bodies, reportedly after paying $25,000 for the necessary information. Today came the arrests.
The suspects were taken to the seclusion of the Meridian Auxiliary Naval Air Station south of Philadelphia. Flanked by FBI men and quickly joined by their attorneys, the suspects were brought in 2 groups. The first group included Sheriff Lawrence Rainey and his deputy, Cecil Price, both men in uniform. The bill of complaint signed by an FBI agent and read to the accused men by Miss Carter charges the arrest of the murdered civil rights workers was a planned affair. Deputy Price was named specifically as having used the color of his office in taking in the trio on a traffic charge, holding them, then turning them loose to be intercepted, threatened, assaulted, shot, and killed. Those are the words of the complaint. By nightfall, all of those arraigned as a group had made bond and were free pending next week's court appearance. Sheriff Rainey and his deputy returned to Philadelphia to resume their law enforcement duties there.
In order for you and me to devise some kind of method or strategy to offset some of the events or a repetition of the events that have taken place here in Los Angeles recently, we have to go to the root. We have to go to the cause. Dealing with the condition itself is not enough. And it is because of our effort toward getting straight to the root that people oftentimes think we're dealing in hate. We are oppressed. We are exploited. We are downtrodden. We are denied not only civil rights, but even human rights. So the only way we're going to get some of this oppression and exploitation away from us or aside from us is come together against the common enemy. Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair?
Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach to get like the white man? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to? So much so that you don't want to be around each other. No, before you come asking Mr. Muhammad, does he teach hate, you should ask yourself, who taught you to hate being what God gave you?
President Nixon reportedly will announce his resignation tonight, and Vice President Ford will become the nation's 38th president tomorrow. That word comes unofficially from aides and associates of both men, but not from the two men themselves. And the swiftly moving events of this busy day in Washington tend to confirm it. Those events included a late morning White House meeting between the president and the vice president, Ford's cancellation of a planned trip to the West Coast and Hawaii, the president's scheduling of a televised address to the nation at 9 o'clock tonight Eastern Daylight Time, and his invitation to congressional leaders of both parties to meet with him before that address. We'll return in a minute with the detailed reports.
From CBS News headquarters in Washington, this is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. And in Washington, Eric Severai.
Communists continued their artillery and rocket attacks on Tanan, 25 miles southwest of Saigon, and on Tay Ninh, 50 miles northwest of the capital. Some light fighting was reported about 40 miles east of Saigon around Xuan Loc, but that city itself was quiet today, awaiting the showdown expected any day now. Bob Simon reports.
Xuan Loc today is a city almost completely destroyed, a city which has withstood 3 major communist assaults during the past week, a city which is poised, waiting for the next attack by communist forces which outnumber the city's defenders. Xuan Loc today is above all a symbol of South Vietnam's will to resist, a symbol of North Vietnam's determination to end the war this year, perhaps this month. People in Saigon feel that if Xuan Loc falls, the war is over. The city has taken 8,000 rounds of incoming artillery fire over the past week. Soldiers have been deeply enough entrenched to withstand most of it. The civilians who did not get out in time have not been so lucky. The morale of the South Vietnamese forces is high. There's nothing they enjoy more than showing off their communist prisoners and the weapons they have captured. They're being resupplied by daily helicopter lifts, giant Chinooks which bring in reinforcements, food, ammunition, which take out refugees. A few weeks ago, Xuan Loc was a city of 50,000 people. This is what's left. Bob Simon, CBS News, Saigon.
There was something of a doubleheader at New York City's Shea Stadium last night. Before the Yankees and the California Angels took the field, an artillery detachment from Brooklyn's Fort Hamilton observed the U.S. Army's 200th anniversary with a 21-gun salute. The cannons were loaded with blanks, of course, but close enough to the outfield fence to blast a hole at one point and start a fire at another. Repairs were made in time for the ball game. Final scores, Yankees 6, Angels 4, Army 21, fence nothing. And that's the way it is. Wednesday, June 11th, 1975. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News. Good night.